right. So I was having a conversation yesterday. It was actually with our boss. And you guys know who Sean Pendergast is. You recognize that anywhere, that dome. But I was talking to our boss about betting lines and gambling and stuff like this. And one of the things that I like to do with you, I always like to pick your brain when it comes to fundamentals of a show, the business and all that type of stuff, because I think like you have a big hand in, how you present things and how you drive things and whatnot. And sometimes what might be interesting to you is not necessarily interesting to the audience. And I don't think anything in our industry has evolved as much as gambling, at least for everybody else. Like jamokes like me and you, we could have talked in depth about gambling forever, but now we're in a point where there's such a push for it. But I find myself wondering, like, how much does the average sports radio listener care about gambling, and what kind of resource can gambling be that can relate to them as well as the jamokes like me or you?
Yeah. It's a good conversation because it has taken off over the last few years because of legalization, not necessarily in Texas, but just in general. It's become a much more accepted vice, I guess we'll call it. I think a big thing, Landry, is the networks embracing it on game day and having it as part of their presentation. So not only does that remove the taboo nature of it, but it also presents it in sort of a latent way to the listener. They can either choose to be interested in it or not, but it's presented as relevant data. So it's definitely become more prevalent. But I think your concern's a valid one because Twitter's more prevalent too. But I think only about 10 to 15% of the people who listen to our show are on Twitter. So you got to be careful. I think to me, the biggest thing when talking about gambling and the spreads on the radio is, one, assume that your audience is all remedial when it comes to this stuff. So don't get into the money lines you're talking. You're going, oh, so-and-so's plus 300 or so-and-so's minus 120. You got to over communicate that what those things mean, the basic fundamental terms that you and I take for and regular gamblers take for granted. I think the other thing too, especially with spreads, is translating what does that mean in terms of I'm watching the game. What does that spread mean? Or that the fact that the Texans have covered the spread in 3 out of 4 games this year, what does that mean? What it means is the general expectation out there is that while the Texans at 0-3-1 are a bad football team, the fact that they've covered the spread in, I think they're 2-1-1 or maybe 3-1, depending on, or maybe 2-2, depending on what you got the Bears game at.
Bears at 3 or 2.5 or 3.5, whatever.
In worst case, they're 2-2. Let's pretend they're 3-1 for a second. While they may be 0-3-1 straight up, the fact that they're 3-1 against the spread means that they're actually ahead of expectations. So that, it really just corroborates a lot of what we've been saying with the Texans. It corroborates a lot of what Lovie Smith says, which when he says we're close, it's really just one other data point or one other way to kind of articulate it. So I think that's the biggest thing, is make it into something and translate it into something that's consumable for the audience.
I'd almost treat like the betting spread like almost as like a resource of, I put Vegas on like a pedestal, and look, they're smart. A lot of times the betting line is because of certain things. It's not necessarily them betting they're going to win this game by 6 points or whatever. But I find myself like putting them on a pedestal where it's like, oh, wow, Kansas is within 6 points of TCU. How the hell is that? So this might be a better game than you or I would think just looking at it. So I've almost started using it like as a resource as opposed to like, hey, should I take the points here? That's how I've tried to like kind of incorporate it. But even then, some listeners probably just care about the win and the loss. But it is a juggling. It's definitely relevant. Like, it's definitely more relevant now. And 3 years from now, when we're having this discussion, everybody might be betting on every single game. But I just look at the betting line as kind of like a resource of like, they think they're going to win this by 6, or, oh my gosh, Texas is 7 points better than Oklahoma, according to Las Vegas. That's just how I've kind of used it. And I know it's not like the exact science of how it's come up with.
Yeah, that's always interesting to me. I don't know how they come up with the lines is interesting to me. I don't know how interesting that is to the audience because it's all based on power ratings and things like that. But what you're talking about, as far as like, let's pretend that it's Sunday night or Monday morning and you get that email from Jimmy Shapiro, from betonline.ag, and it's got all the lines for next week's games. I look at those. There's some weekends I only wind up betting on 2 or 3 of those games, but I'm interested in all of them because you're right. It tells a story. The line tells a story.
Are you a sicko enough to where you can predict lines? I'm getting pretty good at it. Like where I can predict what the line will be.
Yeah. John Harris and I used to do that as a segment on our old show when we were working at Gow, a decade ago. And it was always me who had the lines. I was always interested in Johnny guessing it more so than me, because Johnny didn't bet. So it was, but he knows more football than anybody I know. He's the most knowledgeable football person. So I was always interested as a bettor. I was always interested in what Johnny thought the line should be on a game, because if it was way off, if Johnny said it was supposed to be 6 and it's 4, okay, well, that's whatever. But if Johnny would say, oh yeah, that's 10, and it's like a pick 'em, I'm like, okay, no, now we're on to something here. Now I've got a cheat code. But I think you're absolutely right. The numbers tell a story. And I think the key thing with any number that you bring up on the radio is just to make sure you're using it in a way that's interesting. That's all. Because I think numbers clarify, but they can also be boring and monotonous at times too. So it's all in the way that you position it. But yeah, 100%. Like I look forward to seeing those lines, and I know full well 98% of those games I'm not going to bet. But I heard you guys talking with Michael Jenkins today about that TCU and Kansas game. That's really interesting to me. Like, Kansas is the hot team, and you and I exchanged texts this weekend where I'm a little high on Kansas right now, just because. Didn't we bet 20 on over? We did. I think they've got to win 8 games for me to win the bet, and they're 5-0 right now. But I'm high on Kansas just because I got on them early this year, and that is a team that I've been backing week after week, and I've been just cashing in on Kansas. Yeah. That might come to an end this weekend, to your guys' point, but that's interesting to me. Like when you got the hot team, game day is there, they're at home, and then you open up that email and you're like, wow, and they're a touchdown underdog too. Because it's such I thought it would be like 14, and I suck at this because I thought USC was going to be favored by Oregon State, and the last time I said holy bleep, and maybe we're getting off into the weeds here and kind of showing what the betting line is to us as opposed to the listener, and we're doing what we're talking about. But I was surprised by that, but I enjoy it though. I enjoy it very much. Isn't it weird though? Like that's the other thing too about the betting lines is you get a flavor for who the public team, like Kansas is probably only, like, I don't think you're far off. Like if I had to bet that game this weekend, I would bet TCU. And look, TCU had a great game last week against Oklahoma, and that's probably affecting maybe how people look at TCU, but I'm with you. I think that should probably be double digits. But Kansas is like, little things like game day being somewhere impacts things. I was watching it's amazing, like because the lines are set by the sports books, but then they're moved by the public. It's like the stock market. And I was watching a podcast, or maybe a snippet from a video podcast on Twitter last week, and they were talking about the most backed teams in Vegas by bettors, like which teams have been bet on, which teams do bettors put their most money on. And the least backed team was the Texans. I don't think it's a huge surprise. It's understandable. The most backed team was the Detroit Lions. And they
is
think
that Hard Knocks? Is that a Hard Knocks team?
Hard Knocks. There's a trend. The Hard Knocks team always seems to get more money than they normally would. So it's to me, it's a fascinating thing. Like what exactly? And now it's gotten more and more that way because of the legalization. You got more and more squares. More and more regular bettors, recreational bettors, 1 or 2 game a week bettors that are jumping into the market.
The other thing is, like, I wonder, and maybe this isn't like I'm not knocking the fact that it's there because we have a relationship with them. I'm just speaking from myself as someone who's gone through some bad gambling phases and someone who still uses it as a resource and will place an occasional wager and all that. How much do you really want to hear, like, gambling talk? Like, even when I was at my worst, like, and look, again, like, I'm not saying anything bad. I'm just talking from me. Like, I don't think I've ever been in a phase where it's like, I want to hear someone talk about gambling for an hour. And I say that all to say, because we're talking about, consumers and stuff. That just seems like a lot for me. Even if let's say I have $1,500 in my pocket and I'm going to Vegas, how much do you even want to hear all that stuff?
I want the Cliff Notes.
Too much information. Give me the Cliff Notes.
I want the Cliff Notes. I think you and John do a really good job on your show because you guys have a couple of gambling guests during the week. You keep it tight with them, obviously.
Yeah, he has one. Don't lump me in with that one.
Okay,
Although he did win me $60 going against him.
There is gambling content during your show. I'll say that. You guys do a good job of not only keeping it tight, but also I think keeping it moving quickly, keeping it focused on the games your audience probably cares about. And then mixing it in an entertaining way where you're elevating the guest as being a part of your show. So I think you guys do a good job with that. But as far as look, I'm as big a gambling enthusiast as there is. I think that.
Yeah, you've been the guy for that.
Yeah, I'm very specific on what I got. Like a couple 20 or 30 minute summary type podcasts that rapid fire through some games, and that's about it. Because there can be over analysis too. I think the biggest thing to do if you're betting is come up with what you think the spread should be before you look at the spreads. Like, what the games are coming up next week. Come up with what you think the spread should be for each game. The spreads get released. You compare them. And if there's ones with drastic differences, then listen to some experts analyze those games for in 2, 3, 5 minute blurbs and take in what their opinion is on it. And if the things that are affecting their handicap line up with the way you're handicapping the game, then go for it. That's how I look at it. But I'm with you. As big a gambling enthusiast as I am, there's only so much betting content that I can listen to.
Yeah, and then you get into like situations where, you're getting almost too much information. Like the serious gamblers, like you're getting almost like too much information to where all of a sudden your like head's about to explode and stuff. How do you feel about like posting picks? Because I'm to the point where I don't really like picks. Like, I don't mind you like throwing something out there every once in a while, but I don't need you to just lay out your picks. I would rather just have what the line is, maybe discuss loosely. And this is what me and Lopez have done, like discuss why you would think this, why this would make sense. And then occasionally say hammer it. But as far as like, here are our top 5 picks of the week +6. I don't want to call it hackish, but I will. It is kind of like hackish to just sit there and say, hey, take the -3, take the -4. And there's nothing more hackish. This is pathetic when people give picks and they're not putting their own money on it. You guys, you radio hosts to do that, you're slime balls.
Well, I used to do for the Houston Press, I used to do a best bets post every Friday. And I stopped doing it like 3 or 4 years ago because I kind of sat back and said, okay, I'd look at the end of the year and I would bet all those games and whatnot. And I'd usually wind up anywhere between like 48% and 56% right. There's a few years I would never be way through the roof or way through the floor one way or the other. And I just stopped doing it like 3 or 4 years ago because I'm like, I don't know, like I don't know why. Like, you feel kind of dirty. You feel kind of dirty because it's not about like not being wrong. You know me. I'll be happy to admit I'm wrong and I don't have to make predictions. But like, are people looking at me and going to wager $500 because I said this? Like in my early days, like at ESPN in Dallas, it would be like I'd throw this out there, and then it's like someone would say, "Well, thanks a lot. I bet this," and it's like, man, why did you listen to me? Like I'm just telling you what I'm doing. Yeah, I think it's better. I think it's more fun. Like I thought about that too with the podcast I do with John McClain, the Utopia podcast. I thought to myself, okay, we're trying to think of elements to the podcast. I'm thinking, all right, do I give out like, do I sort of reprise what I was doing on Houston Press and give out like 5 best bets on the Thursday podcast that we do? And I chose not to do it because instead what we did was we just hit, I think what people want to hear more so is they want to hear about the important games, because that's the trap that you run into with giving out best bets, is that a majority of your audience probably doesn't gamble. And the trap that you get into is you wind up talking about games that people don't care about. So that the vast majority of the audience doesn't care. Just because it's a great investment opportunity, if 99% of your audience isn't investing, then who cares? So what I've done as far as gambling content goes, because I still think it's an area that I have more knowledge than the average host. What I do there, and what I'll do on occasion with Payne and Pendergast also, but there's such specificity with the podcast, with what we're hitting and hitting around the league, is that when we do our segment where we preview the weekend and we're just cherry picking the big games of the weekend, is that if there is one that I've got a strong gambling opinion on, then I'll mix in that gambling opinion. Yeah,
throw that one out there. But like the pressure to pick like 5 picks is just always, it's hard for me to find 5 games every weekend that I like.
You know?
What I've kind of started liking, and maybe I can stay true to this formula. I don't gamble that much anymore. It's here or there. You look at something, but I think like assess what you think before and then bet during the game, because you're going to get the same odds during the game usually, and you can actually get like some sort of grasp of what's going on. Just sometimes you get a little too anxious. You're out there in Vegas and you just want to walk up there and the old school get the ticket. Some people are using the apps in Vegas, by the way. You got to slap the ticket, man. You got to go ahead and the cash and get the ticket in Vegas.
That's why every time we talk to Ravel on the show, I always ask about the because there's gambling's becoming more and more prevalent to the point where there's teams that are talking about putting kiosks in the stadium, like betting windows in the stadium.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That would be a good idea. They would make a lot of money there.
Yeah, they would. Whenever I bring it up with Ravel, he's like, yeah, but everybody's doing it on their phone. I'm like, yeah, but dude, there's something about walking up to the window and getting handed the ticket. That may be something. Like you're an old soul that way. I think
got the ticket, you're holding it, you're talking to people about what's going on with it, you hand it to them, not in yet, all right, gotta wait a sec, in, cash, a couple drink coupons, here's 5 for you, thank you very much for the good mojo, keep it going.
Get pissed off, crumple it up and throw it on the ground. I need something tangible to throw when I lose.
Have you ever ripped up one that hit?
I've ripped up ones not that hit, but I've ripped up ones where they said we're reviewing it, like the like at a horse race. That happens a lot. Horses. Like that happens a lot. Probably the one gambling escapade I was most closely literally standing right next to. It was the Nathan's hot dog eating contest, and this was in 2018, I think. 2018. I was a judge 2 years in a row. So when you're a judge at the Nathan's hot dog eating contest, you're standing down in the, kind of down in that pit in front of the long table where they're all eating. So the eaters are all facing outward towards the audience. You're standing in the pit with your back to the audience and kind of beneath the eater. And I was counting Matt Stoney, I think, who won it. He's the only guy to interrupt Joey Chestnut's reign of terror that he's been on. Stoney won it one year. So I was counting his hot dogs.
You're a sicko for judging this, by the way.
Dude, it was so much fun. And so I'm counting his hot dogs. Ken Hoffman is next to me counting Joey Chestnut's hot dogs. And this was the year that Joey won it, but his count got messed up. Like for the big names, there's 2 people. There's one counting and one keeping the flip chart. Ken was keeping the flip chart, and the other judge doing Joey was counting. The guy counting messed up by like 10. And you had books that were he came in 10 below what it should have been. It should have been 76, and they had 66, and Joey was livid at the end. Joey's like, count the plates, because each plate has 5 hot dogs on it. Count the plates. And that's what they did. They counted. 66 would have won anyways, but it was more about breaking the record.
Yeah.
Because the record was like 74 at the time.
He's kind of like Simone Biles. He's competing with himself.
But the big storyline gambling-wise was that you had like ESPN was showing 66 as the official number, and you had sports books that had jumped the gun and paid out on the under because this number was set at like 73.5 or something like that. So you had all these people that got paid on the under, and then the thing got flipped to 76, and it was like, holy cow, that was like a big gambling story. I remember there were 2 network shows. One was Jody Mack. He was on CBS Sports Radio. I had another buddy that was doing ESPN that day. They both had me on to talk about it because they knew I was standing right next to this controversy right here.
I could see Jody Mack doing that.
Yeah, Sean, you're standing right down in the pit down there. Did anybody even tell that the counting was off? How are you not able to count a hot dog when they're chipmunking it 2 at a time?
The funniest thing about Jody is that he'll have you on for something so important. Like he'll be like, hey, I need you to call, like his producer will call, hey, I want you to call him, talk about Deshaun Watson and the trade and stuff. And he'll be like, all right. So you talk to him for like 7 minutes, and then all of a sudden he'll just make you almost feel dumb and just throw you a curveball. So what did you think about Dusty Baker's decision yesterday to bunt in the 7th inning with the runner on third base? And he'll just be like, kind of like stumbling. And then he'll be like, And what about Steven Silas and the Rocket flew into the Magic today? And I'm like, I don't know about what happened in game number 75 with the Rockets and Magic, to be honest with you. There was like an NFL Sunday going on, sir.
That would be, if the slime off existed back then, that would be slime off material.
It would be. Where do you think the future goes? We've talked about kind of where it is and stuff, but where does this go? Like, do we get a situation where there's like advanced stats on gambling? Like, is there going to be like a tiebreaker where you cover the spread, or like, how does this go? Because there's obviously money to be made. Obviously it's further along now than we ever dreamed it would be. Like the NFL sponsored, hell, we have a whole station in the Odyssey thing with BetQL and all that, the BetMGM. Like, where the hell? Like, if I asked you to rub a crystal ball and tell me, like 5 years from now, when we're talking about gambling's role in sports radio, where does this thing go?
In radio, I think, I think in radio in the next 5 years, I don't know that how we treat it content-wise changes. Especially in Texas, where it's not legal. I think we're kind of unique in that we don't live somewhere where it's as pervasive as it is in some other states. And my guess is in 5 years we may still not be. So for us, it may be different than other states. I think the degree to which it continues to bleed into mainstream and it continues to bleed into radio is going to be directed by the big sports leagues. You know, I think that's a lot of it. The embracing by the big sports leagues of the gambling content, adding gambling experts to what they do. When the NFL starts to have gambling experts on like the NBC Sunday Studio show, you know, when they've got gambling experts, when it's completely woven into the tapestry of their coverage of the sport, and that probably escalates it. I don't think it'll ever be anything where it's just I don't think it'll ever be anything where it's like the A topic every day on a show, unless it's a specific niche gambling show. I think it probably locally here in Texas, it's going to be directed by whether or not it's legalized, and then inherently more people are going to be doing it and interested in it. But the key is going to be to keep doing it in a way where you're not turning off your core audience, your big audience, which is probably people who don't gamble.
Because the one thing to me, like just in my career. And how long you've been doing this for? What, like 12 years? 15? Yeah, you've been doing it for 15. So I've been doing it for about that. Mm-hmm. But you know, your path is like one of the most impressive things. But I like fantasy football to me back in like when you first started, it was like, you don't really talk about that. But I really do think like if gambling is not relatable to the common folk, I don't have a percent on it, but I would say at least 85, 90% of our audience has a fantasy team. Yeah. Seriously. Now, I'm not going to get on there and say, well, my fantasy team, like there might be like a passing thought. I'm not going to like lay out like anything, but I think like a bad beat in fantasy, like when Deebo Samuel scored yesterday on Monday Night Football, I was sitting there thinking, dude, there are a large portion of people in our audience and even our friends that either are jumping up and down right now or throwing something, because I do think fantasy football has kind of evolved like the 10, 15 years that we've been doing this.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think the difference with fantasy is that there's more of a communal feel to fantasy football. Like fantasy football is something that you do, like you have a league with your buddies, or like in my case, Amy and I are sharing a fantasy team this year for the first time. So it's something. She's
running it. Don't be sitting there.
She is running it. Yeah, we're 3-1 right now.
She's the Casario. You're Cal.
No, there's no doubt. Yes, I'm flipping the burgers, and she's the one making all the moves. You want to hear something funny? Like she had her alarm set for like 6:15 on Sunday morning to go off, and it goes off, and I'm like, why are we getting up so early? She's like, I got to check on Alvin Kamara to see if he's healthy. He's playing in the London game. I'm like, that's hot. Yeah. Yeah. But I think fantasies. The similarity to gambling is that you're using what's happening on the field to decide, money being exchanged, and there's a win-loss element to you as just a viewer that there isn't when you're just watching it as a spectator. But I think you're right. Like it's crazy the number of people playing fantasy, and fantasies in football at least is, I think, to me.
People know the league because of fantasy, like and like that. The league.
Yeah, you do, and I think it's less. I don't know, like it's less kind of analytic or less like studying betting on sports. There's a real kind of nerdish aspect to it. You know what I mean? A lot
Yeah.
of probabilities and math going on.
It's less impulsive and it's more fluid too,
Yeah.
because, or it might be even like less fluid because it's not like, oh, I'm going to bet on this. I'm going to bet on this. Like it's not as serious. Like people aren't gambling away their damn savings account or houses from fantasy football.
No, but it might be instructive though as to how we cover it on the radio moving forward, because we kind of sprinkle it in. We have a fantasy segment, but it's with Lisa Ann, who everybody likes on the audience, and people like listening to her voice, and then she's good at what she does and things like kind of similar to the gambling experts you guys have on. You know, like you they're personalities as much as they are experts. You know.
I don't think the advice, sometimes it's like, man, I think the beauty of fantasy is you do it yourself. But I think like the mention, like I'm more of like a mention guy, not like a, hey, start or sit type of guy. Should I start this guy? Should I sit this? It's like, oh, wow. Did you see Christian McCaffrey had 6 carries and a lot of people took him first in fantasy? Like that's more like the mention thing. But the start or sit, I feel like everybody has an opinion on fantasy. Now, I hate when people ask me like, should I start or sit? It's like, man, I'll tell you, but that's the beauty of your squad. You can figure that out.
But we might be at the far end of people who have confidence in our ability to make those decisions. You know what I mean? Because of what we do on a daily basis. I think there's a lot of people that look.
4-0 too. Take that.
Yep. What's that?
Yeah, I did it. I'm 4-0 right now at the top of the league. I'm looking good.
My teams, the one I'm doing with Amy is decent. We're 3-1. My other 2 teams are trash. Just total, like rags, like awful.
Who screwed you? McCaffrey? Who screwed you, McCaffrey?
Taylor on one team, and then just everybody on my other team. My other team, I'm being that guy right now. Hey, kids, gather around. Listen to in-depth analysis on all 3 of my fantasy teams. You're trying to build an audience, Landry. By God.
Trying to do it, man. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you. I just wanted to pick your brain on this type of stuff. I thought it would be good to discuss just kind of the art. Who knows where it goes from now, but it's obviously further along than I think you and I probably thought it would be when we first started our careers, and who knows where it's going. The money's only going to get larger. It's just a matter of how much it plays a role and how
hopefully
you
the money, hopefully the money for us gets larger as hosts at some point. Yes.
Hopefully. All right, man. I appreciate you.
You got it, Landry. Thanks.
All right. Sean Pendergast right there. A little media type roundtable, if you will. Subscribe to the channel, follow on Twitter, Instagram, all that type of stuff. Download the Odyssey app. Check out Sports Radio 610 from 6A to 6.